Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Top Question Tuesday coming at you with Casey and Jessica today. Today we're getting into the nitty-gritty and talking about why you have your autoimmune disease. There's a couple buckets we're going to go over that play into getting your autoimmune disease, because autoimmune disease just doesn't come up overnight. You just don't wake up one day and develop autoimmune disease. You just wake up one day and develop cancer. These things are chronic issues that are stemming from a trigger. And we're going to talk about what those triggers may be so you can start to heal those triggers and be cognizant of them. So before we get into that, we're just going to introduce ourselves if you're new to our groups, and then we'll get right into it. So I am Casey Hart. I'm the founder of Nutrition with Casey and have the program, the Feel Good Formula. I work with all women with all different types of autoimmune diseases to regain energy, to get back to the activities that you love to do, and trash your symptoms through food and lifestyle factors. And I live in St. Petersburg, Florida, where the sun always shines behind my blinds.
Amazing.
Who are you, Jessica?
You bet. And I'm Jessica Melnick. I'm the founder of the Anti-Arthritis Method, the host of the Happy Joints Arthritis Solutions Group. And I am a registered holistic nutritionist, and I work with people with autoimmune forms of arthritis. So you can get back to living your life the way that you choose to, not the way that you have to. And I'm in Saskatchewan, Canada, which is sunny today, finally. So not as warm as Florida, but sunny.
We'll get there. We will get there. Okay, awesome. So let's start off with kind of explaining about these buckets we're going to go through. Usually you have a trigger that kind of opens the floodgates to your autoimmune disease. So it can be any of the buckets that we're going through below. And it's usually environment versus genetics. So you always have a predisposition for something in your body, which just means you're susceptible to cancer, you're susceptible to autoimmune disease, you're susceptible to Hashimoto's, you're susceptible to really whatever symptom you have that's in your genes, and that comes from your mom and your dad, put two together. That's what's going on in your body. However, we can turn on and we can turn off genes. So just because you have a diabetes gene, just because you have a cancer or autoimmune disease gene, that doesn't mean that you're going to get those things. That doesn't mean your life is destined because of what your genes say that you have. So what turns on these genes is your environmental factors. And that's what we're going to get into below, because that's what we can actually control. We can't control the DNA, the genes that are in our body, but we can control how we live life going forward. And to turn off those genes if they're on, or to keep them off if they're already off. So the first bucket we want to go over is psychosocial. There's a psychosocial bucket, which is basically either positive or negative views and experiences of your life, your relationships, your spirituality, your feelings, things like that. So this one's kind of the most hard to understand, I would think. And so a couple of these examples might help with this. So toxic relationships. I know we've talked a lot about this because it is so important, but that can turn on your autoimmune genes. Negative thoughts. We've talked about this too. How you perceive yourself, the world, the environment. Do you have a toxic environment? So do you have an unstable home? Do you have a job that's unstable or toxic? A school environment? And then I just went over the emotional part. How do we feel about the world, spiritual health? So how you view those things, either in a positive or negative way, is going to dictate the stress inside of us that's going to either uproot that autoimmune disease, or it's going to put put in remission or whatever you want to say for your autoimmune disease. So one good example I have of this is I dated a guy a long time ago who had a very unstable home growing up, and to that day he didn't have any good feelings about the world. He was very pessimistic. He didn't think he was going to live to be past 18 years old. He was like in survival mode, and I'm not saying he has an autoimmune disease. I have no idea, but those are the kind of thoughts and actions that can uproot an autoimmune disease, because our body is such in a high chronic stress state and it never goes down. So if you think about your past or your present, and think about how you view society, the world, yourself, what your thoughts are like. Are they positive? Are they negative? Are you in toxic relationships or in a toxic environment? This may be the thing that is triggering your autoimmune disease, or triggering another autoimmune disease to come, or triggering a flare up. So we need to get these things under control and shift our mindset a little bit so we can start to thrive. And I know for me, at least, those negative thoughts and toxic environments started for me out of the womb. So I needed to learn that these things affect your autoimmune disease, and then I needed to shift it, and I needed to turn it around 180 and start living in a positive life. So think about that as we start going through the next buckets, and if this pertains to you, what can you do to shift it?
Yeah, and I wanted to add to that too, Casey. I think one of the hardest things for people to understand is their thoughts and their feelings, because I think, at least I know I did for many years, that those things were out of my control. The way that I felt was out of my control. It was all about my external circumstances and my experiences, and that was what gave me my feelings. And it wasn't until I was much older that I realized that we actually have a choice in how we feel about things and how we perceive things. So of
100%.
course negative things do happen, right? Of course, that's part of life, but we can choose to respond to those things differently. We can also choose to think of them differently. So because something negative happens doesn't mean that it has to be this terrible, horrible, negative thing that ruins your week or your month. You can choose how you respond to that. And a lot of how we think is unconscious, it's subconscious. We just automatically have these thoughts. And so it's so important to become aware of how we are actually thinking about things, because we can't change what we're not even aware of.
Yeah.
So you gave a really great example from your life, Casey. And I know for me, a little snippet, like when I was younger, and I think a lot of women can relate to this, just, having low feelings of self-worth, not, ever feeling like I was never attractive enough, I wasn't smart enough, I wasn't this or that enough, and having these feelings for so long. And I never questioned them. I just thought I had to be better in all these ways, or at least in the ways that I perceived would be better or make me more worthy as a person. And it wasn't until much later I realized that I'm choosing to think that way. Like, nobody is putting that on me except myself. And and I can choose to think differently about myself. And when we think differently and we choose to think more positively, we feel more positively. So I think that's something that's really hard, I think, to wrap our heads around sometimes, is that we have more control over the way we think and the way we feel than we, I think, sometimes really realize.
Yeah, and it's that victim mode that we fall into way too often than not. And that's literally just probably how we grew up and what we learned and what role models were. But we need to take ourselves out of that victim mode, because we're living our own lives. So we have 100% control over our own lives, and that includes our thoughts, just like Jessica said. So great point. Thanks for adding on to that.
Yeah.
Do you want to get to the next one?
Should I move on to the next one? So we're looking at physical exercise. So when it comes to having an autoimmune condition like arthritis or Hashimoto's or MS, anything like that, it's really important to get the right amount of exercise. So of course we don't want to be sedentary. Obviously, I know for my clients, if you're having an arthritic flare-up, you're going to be limited in what you physically can do. And that's okay. Maybe, stretching some of your limbs is the only thing you can do at that time until you're out of a flare up, and that's okay. But we also don't want to work out too much. We also don't want to work out too hard or too long, because any of you who've had an autoimmune condition for any length of time, you know that this can make you extremely tired, and it can take you hours or days to recover from overworking out. So you have to find that sweet spot for yourself. And also, the healthier that you get, the more your body is going to be able to tolerate exercise. So I know I've talked to some people in my community that have been like previous marathon runners until they got arthritis. So it's not to say that you're never ever going to be able to run a marathon again, but it may take a process of being more gentle with yourself to work back up to that place.
Yeah, I want to add something too. I want to link it back to this being a root cause for a trigger for an autoimmune disease. So you might be thinking, okay, maybe I should work out less, maybe I should work out more, but what the heck does this have to do with me getting my autoimmune disease? So oftentimes with marathoners or CrossFitters or people that just overtrain, it causes a lot of stress in the body. And this is chronic stress. This is stress that kind of doesn't go away because this is something we're doing every single day, or 4 days to 6 days to 7 days out of the week. So our body never gets that chance to come down and rest and digest and do all of that. And as you know, if you've been listening to us for a while now, we talk about stress and it literally having the ability to uptick an autoimmune disease in us or a flare up or anything. So it's simple. I say simple as running a marathon. It's not that simple, but in the grand scheme of things, as simple as running a marathon is, you can develop an autoimmune disease from it if that's your trigger. So if you already have an autoimmune disease, which I'm guessing you do, think back to your high school days or middle school days or college days. Think about your training. Was this something that you overdid in the past? And more than likely, if you overdid your training, there's a reason for it. You were stressed with work or school. You were not feeling great about yourself, so you overtrained to look better. There's other factors going on in this. So that could be a root cause of your autoimmune disease. And now going forward, now you know maybe what possibly triggered it. And now you can start trying to find a healthy balance with your exercise. Because a lot of us think that exercise is good for us, right? We're going to benefit from this. We're going to reduce our symptoms. Our RA will go away. Our MS will get better. Our Hashimoto's will get better. No, it might get worse. So we need to find that healthy balance. We're not telling you to sit on the couch because that will also flare up an autoimmune disease, but we're telling you that we need to find a healthy balance to what your body can do right now in a healthy manner. So I digress on the exercise part now.
No, that's great. That's a good point.
The next point, the next bucket for a root cause of an autoimmune disease would be trauma. So I know I really resonate with this. Jessica used to be a social worker, so she has seen her fair share of trauma in children. So trauma produces stress in our bodies, right? It produces the fight or flight. It drains our adrenals. These are all things that develop an autoimmune disease because, again, our bodies are always at a high state, which is up here, which is chronic. We need it to be down here and relax. But when you have trauma, subconsciously and consciously, our bodies aren't able to get that that peace that we need. So working through your trauma can be very, very, very helpful in healing an autoimmune disease and stop or reduce those flare-ups that you have. Because I know when I'm triggered from a traumatic experience or when I'm super stressed, my autoimmune disease flares up instantly. So some examples of trauma, because usually we think of physical abuse, car accidents, war, things like that. It can be I hate using the word simple in this, but it can be a less dramatic reason to have trauma. So things like abandonment or seeing a loved one die, whether that was seeing them die in a brutal way or seeing them die just in the hospital, as they go in peace, can cause trauma. Having your dog or cat died. I know if my cats died, I would definitely carry that trauma with me. Um, and what else? A concussion can be very traumatic, or dating a toxic person like a narcissist can be trauma ridden and triggering if you get into that situation again. Even words can be traumatizing. If you were traumatized by some words that people said to you and another person said those words but in a different context, you can have a panic attack because of that trauma that you had before. And I want to note that not everything causes trauma in everybody. So my cat dying may cause trauma in me, which sounds silly, but your cat dying may not cause trauma for you. Or, seeing your grandma die in the hospital may not cause trauma, but it might for me. So we're all different in what triggers us in our trauma. And not saying one is wrong or bad or right. But we're all different in that manner. So again, I urge you to look back into your past if you haven't done so already, and this can be triggering, so do it at a time where you feel safe. But think back to things that you may find that trigger you or that was trauma in your life, and you're still holding on to it and you haven't released it yet or made peace with it or reflected on it, because those things are sitting inside of us and they're causing us at a low state chronic stress, which if we got rid of that would definitely help healing our autoimmune disease to the next level.
Yeah. And I think too, when it comes to trauma, and like you were saying, the same event happening to two different people can produce completely different results in each of those people. And it comes back to how we perceive those events. How we perceive those events may or may not make it traumatic for us.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to, okay, what are we making this situation mean for us? What are we telling ourselves? What are our thoughts about this situation that are contributing to how we feel about it? So again, always being aware of what are your thoughts and your feelings about these things and what does it mean to you? So you understand where you're coming from, because again, you can't fix it unless you understand what it means to you.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
Yeah. And so the next one we have is things like diet, the food we eat, the nutrients that we take into our body, our air quality, our water quality. So things like processed foods, fried foods, the standard American diet, lots of added sugars, excess alcohol, man-made foods, refined carbohydrates, chemicals in our food, things like chemicals and toxins in our tap water versus filtered water. All of these things that we're ingesting as food and water into our body, the quality really, really matters in terms of how our body responds to those foods and how those foods can or may not be used to support our health. A lot of those foods that I just listed are also going to contribute to our autoimmune conditions. They're part of the root causes, right? So there's never really just one root cause. In most cases, it's a combination of things. And that's, of course, what we're telling you guys today. So, being aware of the food quality and the water quality that we're taking in. And we have a whole live on water quality and food quality, two different ones, actually. Also looking at air quality, like what's happening around us. Do we live near like a commercial farm where they spray chemicals and those chemicals sometimes drift over to where we live? Are we being exposed to those things? Is our body able to absorb and use the nutrients in the food that we're giving it? So oftentimes we have a compromised gut system when we have an autoimmune condition. And so we're not able to fully digest properly and fully absorb the nutrients that we're actually taking in. So we can have a lot of mineral and vitamin deficiencies. So that's another aspect of that whole, what we're taking in terms of food and water.
Mhm.
So these are just really important things to think of.
Yeah. And again, to what I said in the beginning of this live, this is years and years and years of eating, excuse my French, a shit diet or shit water or air quality, whatever. This, again, doesn't just happen from a month-long period of eating cakes and candies because it's your birthday month. This is starting from maybe childhood all the way up to when you got your autoimmune disease, and maybe the food triggered it, but maybe the stress did, the trauma, the physical exercise, whatever. So again, think back to what was your diet as a kid? What did your parents feed you? I'm not blaming your parents at all. You know, we don't know what we don't know, but what did you eat in college? And these nutrients and air and water and food that's going inside of us contribute to a leaky gut, or it helps heal a leaky gut. So are we making our gut lining worse and more leaky, or are we making it better and stronger so we don't develop an autoimmune disease? So I'd invite you to look into what your diet was as a kid. That might be really eye-opening for you. So the last bucket in the root causes of your autoimmune disease is xenobiotics, microorganisms, and radiation. And I know that's probably like I'm speaking French here. I will go over it. The good French, not the bad French that I just said too. Okay, so xenobiotics. Xenobiotics are foreign substances. So things our body doesn't
Recognize.
thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. Doesn't recognize. So things like pesticides, flavors, like those red dyes, blue dyes, yellow dyes, drugs, so pharmaceuticals, these are man-made. Cosmetics, so again, man-made particles, industrial chemicals, environmental pollutants that we're putting in the air, like jet fuel, or it could be really just anything. Microorganisms. So these are bacteria, fungus, viruses. We know what's going around lately, but a lot of these bad bacteria, bugs that live inside of us can get overpopulated, and that can cause an autoimmune disease. It can cause disruption in the immune system. It can cause a leaky gut. So we want to make sure we have a healthy balance of bacteria, good and bad, in our bodies. Plug in probiotics there. We love those. Same with funguses and viruses. So things like candida and yeast overproduction and all of these things. And these come from an acidic body, or an altered pH, if you will, or stress can also produce these things. Things in the air that you ingest, or food or water, things like that. All of this stuff can just get in our body in random ways. And we pretty much all know what radiation is, but things like power lines, x-rays, if you've had a lot of those growing up, or a lot of medical issues, if you lived by a power plant or worked in a power plant every day, EMFs, which radiate from our phone, our computers, 5G, Bluetooth, electrical cords, Wi-Fi, we can have sensitivities to this. And if your body is susceptible to it, again, with genetic predisposition, we can get toxic on these things, and we can trigger an autoimmune disease or a flare-up. So I know these are things we kind of don't hear in the media often, or education, but these things definitely deserve their own bucket, because they can trigger and make an autoimmune disease worse. And they also don't show up really great on lab tests. Usually bacteria, like microorganisms like fungus and viruses, do. but things like xenobiotics, xenobiotic toxicity or radiation toxicity do not, and your doctors and a lot of other healthcare practitioners don't look at that first. We look at the popular things first. So again, inviting you to look back to where you were born, your childhood, where you went to college, where you work every day or used to work. Were these things in your environment every single day? Did you have a lot of bacterial issues, funguses, and viruses? Did you take a lot of antibiotics or antivirals as a kid? This can also contribute. Do you wear a lot of makeup? Take a lot of pharmaceuticals, things like that. So look into, basically just look back into from the womb on to where you are now, and from our 6 buckets that we just listed out, what really stands out to you? What can you shift a little bit? And we'll be happy to talk you through this too and answer any questions that you have or thoughts or opinions. So feel free to comment below or comment in our groups about this. But super interesting stuff. What do you have anything to add on to that, Jessica?
No, I don't. I just think it's just like you said, we're talking about all these different aspects and things that can be root causes for your arthritis and autoimmune conditions, because it's usually never just one thing. And like you said, it's things that accumulate over time until finally there's a trigger event, and something kind of is the last drop of water that makes it spill over the edge, and we develop this autoimmune condition. So but I like, it's not all doom and gloom, because on Thursday we're going to be talking about what you can actually do about it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes. So there's lots that you can do to make this so much better.
Exactly. And we've broken those down into buckets too. So root things that you can do to help your autoimmune disease further than just diet, like we've talked about a lot. So stay tuned on Thursday to get the more uplifting live. I hope this live, though, was eye-opening and beneficial and kind of made you think a little bit, so we can start healing from here once you know what's going on. Feel free to comment below if you have any questions or thoughts or opinions. We'd love to hear them. Put a like on this video if you really thought it was interesting and you enjoyed it, and we'll be back on Thursday. Awesome. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.